Delia Henry, who is on the Alba, an Alba candidate for the list for the West of Scotland, and she's going to talk about her experience, why she joined Alba, what her motivations were, and any other direction the conversation might go. So first of all, thank you for Delia for being with us this evening.
Thank you very much for inviting me along this evening. I really appreciate it.
Okay, just tell us about your background, how you got into politics, how you, your involvement, how long you've been interested in independence, and your experience with the SNP and your career. Just a short bio, if you will.
Okay. I have always been, my family were political, particularly my mother. I come from the East End of Glasgow, and we were a typical East End of Glasgow Labour voting family. My mother was always very interested in politics, as was my father, but my mother was kind of very motivated by it. So it was always a thing in my life, even as a child. As I kind of grew up, I was interested at school in political aspects of what we did. But I then, after several years, I came to work in the charity sector. I worked in health and social care. And after having worked for a while as a manager in the NHS, I get the opportunity under the Community Care Act in 1996. I managed the discharge of from a long stay hospital in Greater Glasgow Health Board. It was called Lennox Castle. And I worked a lot with the charity sector because I commissioned services to support people moving out of a long stay hospital. And that was my links for working in the sector. And my first job in the sector was as the director of Diabetes UK. So I was the Scottish director of a UK organisation, and I had a network of membership, and I had 40 branches across Scotland. So that was great because that showed me bits of Scotland that I had never seen. You know, some of them not my doorstep. I visited every health board, and that included the Outer Isles and every mainland board. But I also engaged a lot with the membership. But that gave me an introduction to working in politics and how policy could be changed. And I had services that I managed, but I also had a team of communications team, and we developed policy. And I was very fortunate in that role to chair the first big policy change in how diabetes care was delivered in the NHS in Scotland. And I worked with doctors and nurses and dietitians, etc. And that was with the Scottish Government, and it changed the whole structure of diabetes care. And still, I'm very proud of the fact that we implemented then diabetic retinopathy screening. So that's if you get diabetes, the back of your eye, a picture is taken, and they can check and stop the deterioration in your eyesight. And that still happens in Scotland. So that was my first big working in politics and how policy could change the structure of services that were really important for people. And then I went on to work as director, a similar job with deaf people in the Royal National Institute for the Deaf. And then after that, I was director of Age Scotland, and I ran the charity there, the charitable arm, not the commercial arm of the organisation. So that's my kind of professional background. In my personal life, I'm married. I've got 2 sons and 4 absolutely delightful grandchildren who live relatively nearby now, because some of them have moved back up to Scotland just recently. During lockdown, I haven't seen them as much as I would like to, but that might change. I'm seeing a couple of them on Friday, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Of course. Okay, so you've worked at a lot of charities. You've and you've been very active and traveled a lot, and have had some success in actually implementing policies. So okay. And how has that informed your more directly political involvement?
Personally, politically, I said I was a traditional Labour voter, as was most of Scotland at that time. But Tony Blair did it for me, frankly. You know, Tony Blair was, decided that Labour was just about winning. Labour did win. You know, they were in government several times. But it became very much like the Tory party for me. And that just didn't work. And then I was looking around for other options and started voting SNP to support independence, because I then, very important for me, thought the way to change things here is for Scotland to be independent, and to do that you need to be proactive. And I voted SNP. So I did that. I've done that for about 20 years. And then in 2014,
was that prior to the establishment of the Scottish Parliament? Has that been? Have you voted for SNP mostly since the establishment of the Scottish Parliament? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in 2014, the referendum, I just thought, enough. And some of my jobs, it would have been problematic being a member of a political party, but I just thought enough. So I became very active and joined SNP. And I knew some MSPs, including my own at the time, very, very well. And I called my MSP and I said, look, what can I do to actually change something? What can I do proactively to get actively involved in politics? And I did. I became involved at a branch level. At constituency, I was quite quickly asked to be the Women's and Equalities Officer, which I was happy to do. And then, and I worked in every election from 2014 onwards, both Westminster, not just both, but so Westminster, Europe, local elections. I proactively engaged in all of those, and ultimately became a convener of a branch in Eastern Bartonshire. So I have been very involved at grassroots, and because of my background, again, working big at membership organisations, which charities often are, I found I really liked the idea of working with people who were members, were like-minded, and were so motivated. And you could see the momentum growing around post-2014, I felt, for independence. And convincing people, talking to people, I take great delight that I've managed to convince some of my long-standing Labour family members and friends to say, the way we have to go here, we cannot continue along the lines of Westminster running Scotland, basically, and making all the big calls that make difference to people.
Yeah. Before we go on with that, I did want to touch on the women's equalities issue, because I know that it's been a big issue. I know that you had resignations from the NEC over it, and I know that many of the women who were involved in Alba have left for that reason. If you could just tell us a little about the controversy, that because I don't fully understand it, and I know that resulted in Joanna Cherry stepping down and being booted out of the government, the shadow government in Westminster. What can you tell us about that, just so people who, like me, who aren't up to speed on it really at all, can understand it a little bit better in terms of the policy of the SNP regarding equalities?
So there's been a couple of pieces of legislation that have been, one proposed, one has been passed. The Gender Recognition Act, which is about, I'll take a step back. There's a group of women in SNP, quite a lot of women actually, have felt concerned that they couldn't talk about an issue. Now, controversy happens in politics, it does. And you will get people who have positions at opposite ends of the spectrum. My personal position in this one would be that, say for example, around the Gender Recognition Act, it was a policy, as was the hate crimes bill that has recently been passed. It hadn't gone to conference, it hadn't been debated by the membership. And I think that would have been the best thing to do. But it suddenly became party policy without having a debate. And a lot of it was around limiting the time that people who were trans, who currently...
And I want to help get these terminology down, because I don't fully understand. So if you're trans, that means you've shifted from one gender to the other?
Yes.
Okay.
Or you choose to, but at the moment you're required to have a 2-year period to get a gender recognition certificate. And you go through a series of assessments in the NHS.
Mhm.
It's
Okay.
it's a
And
long
does that
time.
does that necessarily involve, operations,
Well, it can do. It
it
can
can,
do.
but it doesn't have to.
No, but it can do.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay.
So the Gender Recognition Act was suggesting that this should be reduced to 6 months, and you could just have a certificate, and then you can just choose to be whatever gender you decided. It was primarily men who choose to become a woman, with no surgical procedures, any of that. You just had to declare it for 6 months. And a lot of women were worried about that for a whole series of reasons,
Oh, sure.
not least safeguarding. So safeguarding is the big issue. So safeguarding around different aspects of people's lives. And primarily women were worried about it. Now, I think I do not know any woman, and I wouldn't be interested in engaging with any woman who did not agree with equalities. You would imagine from my background, I would argue that everyone should have, under the 2010 Equalities Act, there are criteria that people have to fit, including gender as well. Sex is one of them, not gender, sex.
Right.
However, this piece of legislation was looking at that would be circumvented, and that worried a lot of women. So, long story short, I would argue that this debate would have to be, the heat had to be taken out of it. If we were going to do it in SNP, we're going to do it, they should have had a debate at conference. One of the most grown-up debates, I wasn't a member of the party at the time, but I used to go to a lot of party conferences with work. And I remember the NATO debate, it was in Perth Concert Hall. And it was really emotional, and people were almost entrenched on either side. And it was very emotive. And people went on to the stage. Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon were there. And the proposal passed. And there were people who left the SNP because they were worried about it. They didn't want.
What year was this roughly?
Oh, now don't quote me on this, but it was. I joined SNP in 2014, so it would have been prior to that, 2012, 2010, something like that.
Just curious.
Yeah, back then. And it was a really grown-up debate, some passionate speeches on stage, and they came to a position, it went to a vote, then it went through, and people signed up to it because they felt as if they'd had the opportunity to voice their concerns. I would argue further than that, in something like the Gender Recognition Act or the Hate Crimes Bill, we've got a model now in Scotland, and it's worked in the Republic of Ireland, of the Citizens' Assembly.
Yeah.
I would argue that something like as emotive as that could go to a Citizens' Assembly to be debated, and a position taken that would be acceptable to the populace, to Scots. And it would become to an informed debate, and it could go back to Parliament in an informed way. And I feel that would be an important approach to take, and a fair, because I think we do need Scotland, I want a Scotland that's fair to its populace, to our Scots people. But we also need to get people to sign up to issues. And this one has been particularly emotive. It's one, not the only reason that I left SNP. My primary driver in all of this is independence. And I think Alba is offering us the opportunity to go up a gear and have a supermajority. So there were lots of reasons, but the GRA and the Hate Crimes Bill was one of the aspects that I decided that I would say, okay, I'm leaving SNP. I worked really, really hard there. Independence is my driver. I feel we've gone back a gear a bit. And I think Alba has taken us up a gear. And that's my feeling on it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. I didn't want to dwell too much on that, but I did want to get a clearer idea of what the whole riffraff was about. Also, very quickly, I know there was the Citizens Assembly that was a couple years ago, and they had these sessions, and of course there was coronavirus. What's become of that?
I just recently listened to a podcast, a Commonweal podcast. And there was an online citizens' assembly on green policies for Scotland. So it's not been adopted by any party yet, but it was 100 Scottish citizens who were, well, it was be more than 100, there were 100 people involved. And how it works is that academics in the appropriate area will present to the Citizens' Assembly. And the guy who was on, and I can't remember his name, if I'm honest, but he was a doctor of, the environment was his issue. And he was a marine biologist. And he said some of the hardest questions he's ever had was from this group of people when he was called back in, when they were trying to make decisions and make informed positions on issues. So it feels like a vigorous process. And also, you don't have people who have an agenda going into it. They're making an informed position and going on a journey. And to me, that feels like a good approach.
Okay. All right. We just got a question regarding what we're doing, and then we'll move on to more independence. But a point about the scale of the problem and where our focus should be, according to the person who's asking this question. How many actual incidents have there been of men using transgender legislation to abuse women in Scotland versus incidents of violence and abuse by men? I would characterize what you said as you being concerned about that men, for example, men declaring themselves to be women and therefore as a woman being able to, well, enter women's bathrooms, for example, or that's
there can be a lot of suspicious. Yeah. I don't have numbers. It won't be big whole numbers because the trans population is quite small relative to the male population. Men are about half ballpark of the population. So numbers is not the issue here. It's about people feeling comfortable with the position and their life. And if people are worried, people in vulnerable positions, I've heard a presentation just last weekend, actually, there was a women's conference about women's prisons. Now, women who are in prison, I've never been there, are very vulnerable. They usually have had very traumatic lives.
Of course.
And we heard of one case of a woman who had got really rehabilitated in prison, had done really, really well. And man had been transferred from the male prison and had declared himself as transgender, which he was entitled to do, but was moved to the females' prison, but had a very difficult background, had been in prison for sexually assaulting women. So there were a lot of frightened women in this women's prison. And this particular woman that I referred to ended up deteriorating because this person who was trans was in the next cell and she was really frightened. So that's one example, and it's anecdotal. Well, it's not anecdotal, it happened. However, if we can avoid that kind of situation, we need to think about it. And the solution that was proposed, and again, I'm not an expert in this field, was a third space. So if someone is trans, in those circumstances, if we had a third space, that could be a solution. Some people don't want that to happen, but we need to debate it, and we need to get solutions that work for people. I'm not an expert in the field, but I was, and I would say I'm a feminist. In the 70s, I was one of those women who would march and be because I was involved in politics. So I think it's important that women's voices are not subsumed or not being told that they can't speak. Sadly, social media can be a difficult
I agree. And for everybody just expressing their opinion about things, it's
it becomes very heated. Hence my personal opinion of something like a citizens' assembly that can make an informed position. So, for example, in the Republic of Ireland, and which is traditionally a Catholic country, there was a citizens' assembly because they didn't have abortion. The debate, I mean, they subsequently had a referendum and it passed by 90-odd%. But initially, they had a citizens' assembly discussing it, and it went through. People came to an informed position and how it worked. But it wasn't even just because of the issue. Back to my point about the debate on NATO, it was about people whose voices, they felt their voices were being heard. That's really important. It's really important in a democracy. And I would argue if we have mechanisms to allow that to happen, and that's not Twitter, then we should look to do that.
Okay. Okay. Let's go on to more your own perception that you spoke about before, which I think is perfectly valid, of the SNP becoming, just in low gear. Let's just put it towards independence. And I certainly witnessed that myself. I became a member of the SNP mostly so I could attend the conferences. And I live in France. I've been back and forth, but several times over the last years until the pandemic has prevented me from doing so. But I remember, just that there was never any fringe events on independence. The only thing we really got, of course, there was, of course, conversations among people about it, of course, but Nicola Sturgeon would get up and say, and there will be independence. Everybody goes, yay, at the end. And then the music comes on, everybody goes home. And that was about it. That's, for me, what was the totality. And Jim Sillars made that point as well. And the fact that there has not been sufficient work done on what independence would mean. And I, for example, I've developed this constitutional framework. Through a friend of mine who knew Mike Russell, I submitted it to him. He had a look and, he seemed impressed, and he sent me, and when I was there a couple of years ago, I went to see some civil servants and talked to him about it, and they asked me some questions, and then that was it, and I thought, my view, hey, I'm giving you this thing. I mean, you may not be independent yet, but at least you can sort of see if it can be adapted once independence is achieved, et cetera, et cetera. But it's almost like and I had a similar experience with other people who are working on constitutions as they've, gone to, and including Alex Salmond, who I think this time appreciates the value much more than he did, but just this kind of blind spot towards, towards even beginning to think about and develop, the Scottish state in independence, because you can always plan even if you're not independent. So, I mean, that was my perception. How did you see since 2014, since Salmond resigned and Sturgeon has been first minister, how have you
Yeah, 2014 was a landmark for people. I remember my husband and I were in Alicante 10 days before the referendum. So
where's Alicante? Sorry,
it's in the south of Spain.
Okay.
Right. So we were there in 2014, just before the referendum. And, it was amazing. People heard our accents and they were stopping us in the street. And this is going to sound dreadful. It's very Spanish. It's a very Spanish city. It's lovely. And because they heard our accents and they were asking us about it. It was being covered on Spanish television. Glasgow was on the television. So there was this fantastic momentum. And it was when we had the poll of, I think it was 51%, 52%.
Yeah, that would have just before the vow came out, right?
Just before it. Yeah. And my husband, I remember it. I just walked out the shower and had a wrap on. And my husband said, that's a week too early. And they threw everything at it. So that momentum was there. And I still remember how devastated I was the day after. Devastated. I
know. My own personal experience, because I was there for it, I covered with Independence Live. We went to the Emirates Arena and we were filming it, and it was incredible because that was, and we actually got later we got contacted by the National Library of Scotland. I signed a paper saying they could use the footage because it was the first live coverage footage on live stream, and it was just amazing.
I still remember
And I remember just before I was going down to the Emirates Arena, I went through George Square, and the joy, the flags, all that, and this lovely woman sat me down, and she put a little, painted a little Scottish flag on my cheek, and it was just delightful. And then we go around and we talk to people, and we see all these prominent politicians, Ruth Davidson looking all, and then there was the count, and then it went the wrong way, and then it was funny because after that, during that, my left elbow started to swell up. I had an infection, and I've never had this before. It was weird. And then I went back to the right just before that. I got interviewed on French radio in the morning, the morning after the referendum, and I heard these people talking. I can send you the link if you understand French, but I remember them saying, they had this. It was just this meaningless banter about independence. Oh well, maybe they can keep the Queen. And they got to me. It's like Scotland just wasted the greatest opportunity it's had in its history to become independent and build a non-corrupt. I just went off. It was hilarious. If you type my name on YouTube, it's still the top thing in the French thing. But I was just devastated too, and then I had to go to the hospital, to get my swelling down, and I was, the next night when there was all that violence in George Square, I had to, luckily I was in the hospital. But anyway, but yeah, we were all crushed.
Yeah. So that feeling of almost making it, there were so many of us. And then with SNP, I have worked in every election since 2014.
And how active have you been at do you go to your local groups, SNP groups?
But with SNP, yeah, I joined and almost immediately became the Women's and Equalities convener of the constituency. And then
constituency, okay.
And then I was.
Sorry, which constituency is that? Just
sorry.
Which constituency?
It's Eastern Bartonshire.
Okay.
Eastern Bartonshire. So just outside Glasgow.
Yeah.
And I subsequently became convener of a branch, and I organised. I worked on elections. Westminster elections, European elections, local elections, Scottish Parliament elections, all of them since then. So really kind of grassroots activity to get people elected, to drive forward what I thought would be our opportunity to become independent.
Yeah.
But it actually was said to me at one election, a Westminster election, that when I spoke to someone about independence, I was told not to do that because we might not get votes.
Would that have been 2015 or 2017?
2015.
Okay. And that's when they got 56 seats. Yeah.
Sorry, no, not that one. 2017 when we lost seats. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. No, I figured. I know that makes more sense. That makes more sense.
2017 when we lost.
Because they did not make it a hallmark. They didn't talk.
They didn't mention it. They didn't mention it. And it was personally, I was told not to talk about it, which didn't go down well. You probably gathered. Because that's my driver for doing this.
What is the logic of that? I just don't understand, and maybe you don't either. Maybe you're at a total loss as well.
I don't understand the logic. It's in the name. You're talking about. I've worked around communications and brands and stuff like that for 25 years. It's in your name, Scottish National Party. So you've got to be about independence.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't make sense. And actually, I feel quite strongly. I remember when Ian Blackford and the SNP MPs walked out of Westminster.
Yeah, I remember that.
And they got cheered. It was sending such a message. And I felt that was an opportunity to build on. Mm-hmm. And we haven't done it. It hasn't happened. So for whatever reasons, I feel personally that we've gone back a gear a bit. So I think this is an opportunity that we have to do it. And also you've got the situations with during COVID, we've had Brexit, the impact in Scotland on the fishing industry, for example, which is well publicised. people have been lied to around Brexit. You know, the constituency that I live in was one of the highest no voting constituencies in 2014, but one of the highest Remain voting constituencies in Europe in the Brexit election. And people are starting to talk about being let down. So there's that. There's the Tories are now treating Scotland quite contemptibly. And
well, they always have. I mean,
but it's what I feel it's worse under Boris Johnson. Maybe that's
I can see that compared to Cameron. I mean, Cameron was, you know, respectful. I mean, he was not, you know, he didn't seem as overtly contemptuous as
yeah. And he also,
I remember Cameron making the speech about, oh, we love you, Scotland. I'm very proud of my, you know, Scottish roots, that kind of thing. So, you know, I mean, he seemed, you know, a little bit more genuine in that respect. But
well, maybe he was just a slightly better person. I don't know. But he came out the morning after the referendum and started talking about England.
Evil, yeah. So well made evil.
The best recruiter for SNP. that speech. But, however, sorry, on you go.
Yeah, what do you think the reluctance is? I mean, I spoke to Craig Murray. I've interviewed him before, and he, you know, at one of the conferences, and he was an active member as well. You know, he wanted to have a fringe meeting on at the conference on independence. They said no. I submitted a resolution to a local branch in Leith, a friend of mine who's a member there. She submitted a thing about adopting a written constitution, passed unanimously in her branch, went to the upper wit, gone. You know, why is this? Why do you think there's this reluctance, including, as we were speaking about before we went on air? You said you got the you know, this thing through the letterbox about you know, the SNP manifesto, and independence doesn't appear on the sheet. What's going on? I mean, or how do you attempt to explain it?
I'm not sure. I honestly don't, like you. It doesn't make sense. I feel that we have to push for this. I think I get the feeling that we are not pushing Westminster enough. We are not saying, we're still asking for permission to do stuff. And actually, I don't understand that. That doesn't feel right to me at all. So, but there wasn't an alternative. There wasn't an alternative. And we also have this 2/3 majority that's talked about, that if we have a 2/3 majority of independents, MSPs, not a particular party, but MSPs, you know, we've got the mandate for another independent referendum, or we can have an election that's effectively that.
Yeah, and there's other routes as well. I mean, there's
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that in my perspective, you know, and you know, the First Minister has boxed herself into a corner with saying that the Section 30 is the gold standard, and that we can't even think about having one until the pandemic is over, or whatever that means, ignoring the fact that there will be an election in a few weeks. People can vote in one way or another. There's no reason that same, you know, very safe method of voting could, or even better, you know, a verified electronic voting, so that could be set up relatively easily, could be employed for some kind of confirmatory referendum. But in my view, as you see in the Alex Salmond, you know, the conference that he had today, these things can't wait. I mean, the Scottish fishing industry is on its knees. And as Paul was saying, you know, his dad, who I believe works in sheet metal, they're saying order everything now that you can, because it's going to take so much longer to get whatever you need because of Brexit. And it's only really sinking in now. But the idea that there could be, you know, but again, as Salmon was saying, I just the lack of urgency is, in my view, is palpable, and I just speaking as someone who's been very interested in this for a while, I don't understand why there isn't more of a sense of urgency, and they keep saying, oh well, and even just today in or just in the last couple of days with this ridiculous power play by Westminster to what is it, the child adopt, putting in UN child rights laws, and Westminster challenging that. We'll see you in court. No, just get out of here. Get out of there. I don't understand why. Oh yeah. So you're going to spend how much money on lawyers, going to the Supreme Court, arguing this, arguing that. Who knows how it'll work out? But it's still accepting that Westminster has this power over Scotland, and so they're going to fight it out in that arena in the US UK Supreme Court, which of course is going to side with Westminster based on Westminster sovereignty. So it's just so anyway, sorry to go off on a tangent like that, but
not at all. No, I think you're absolutely right. I think for me that approach that they're taking the Scottish, that piece of legislation you're talking about was supported cross-party. So
apparently it was unanimous.
Including unionists, right?
No, apparently it was unanimous.
Exactly, yeah. Unanimous piece of legislation. So the Tories in Westminster are going to challenge a piece of legislation that the Tories in Scotland supported.
Yeah.
Now, to me, that's just flexing their muscles. That's just saying you will do what you are told. And I think that's the thin end of the wedge, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's all that is. It's a get back in your box.
Right.
So that's that. So they're starting that. Your point about Brexit, this is going to bite big time. I don't live in the northeast, and I don't have a background in fisheries, but I've watched the story quite closely. The fact that the fishermen aren't able to go with the restrictions around Brexit and the extra bureaucracy that's restricting them, which will inevitably push up the costs of transporting the fish, and longestine in particular, which is sought after in Europe.
There's also shellfish as well, because apparently before they would take the raw shellfish to Holland, and then they would do the cleaning and stuff like that. And so, I mean, it's all very complicated for each one, but it's that type of thing. Whereas before they had the methods to do that. Now, in order to sell it in the market, they have to do the cleaning themselves, have a certificate to say that it's properly cleaned before it can do that. And of course, it's more expensive. And of course, if you're a average restaurant in Spain that wants to sell this stuff, you'll go elsewhere. Why?
So you'll go to another market. So it's killing that's one example, but it is killing the market. So, and there's lots of bureaucracy. So again, that's another imperative. And you've touched on COVID. We're talking about, we keep hearing post-pandemic. I don't know what that means. Does that mean when everybody's vaccinated? Does it mean that we're never going to have COVID? Because it may be, I'm not a scientist, but my daughter-in-law is a biochemist, and she knows several people who've worked in the research field.
Well, I mean, and even apart from the medicine, the whole. Well, it's like back in 2001 when they declared the war on terror in the United States. Yeah, this war will finish when terror is eradicated. What does that mean? It's the same thing.
It's the stereotypical "how long's a bit of string." What does that mean? Post-COVID. If it's everybody's vaccinated, well, that's measurable. But that statement to me is not measurable. So I don't know what that means. So there are a lot of things there that tell me, and I think I'm reasonably kind of informed, that we don't, I think we need something tangible. We need to say enough. We need to say a Section 30 order. I think Nicola Sturgeon has painted herself into a corner. We need to look at other options. We need to do that, because we're not going to get a Section 30, in my opinion, from the Tories. We're just not. Yeah.
Okay. Question or comment. I agree with Delia's point in regards to asking permission. It doesn't feel right to anyone who understands sovereignty and recognizes Scotland as a sovereign country. So, affirming what you said, I can't argue with that. Let's see, a couple things about policy. Let's see, upon reasserting Scotland's statehood, does Alba sit with regards to building statewide cycling infrastructure like they have in other European countries? They have plans to rebuild the communities around Faslane when they decommission Trident and the successors. Even if they invested a few billion, it would be far cheaper and more beneficial than keeping Trident and its successor, which will cost Scotland over 200 billion. I don't know to what degree Alba's developed policy in those areas. I don't. I'm, you know, if you could comment on that in whatever form.
It's early days with policy, as you can imagine. The party's 4 weeks old. But we have had our first policy conference with candidates. And we've got the Women's and Equalities policy, which has been published. We're having another policy debate this weekend. I think it's fair to say that anyone that I've spoken to in Alba is not supportive of Trident. And we would be looking at how that would be, that investment could be improve Scotland and our infrastructure. At this juncture, I don't know the detail around that. What was the other point you made? Was it cycling?
Oh, about cycling paths and about rebuilding communities around Faslane and cycle paths. So I imagine you may not have gotten to cycle.
We've not got to that stage yet. I think it's not unreasonable to suggest that we will be looking at a green policy, you know, because Scotland, I know Alex Salmond, when he was First Minister before, used a lot of the planning regulations to improve the green infrastructure that's starting in the research in the north of Scotland. So used legislation that we had to make something happen. And I quite like the idea of that. But I would want more powers and independence to really give us a springboard. And that would give us the opportunity to make the policies to get better. Logic would tell us that we do need to look very closely at our green policies, and we'll get great opportunities in Scotland with wind, wave, etc. power, and not just to capture it, but to manufacture it.
Yeah, and sell it to the rest of Europe.
You know, we have got the opportunities to do that and sell it to the world. So, and that's my take on it from a very kind of just looking at and listening to and reading some stuff. That could be fantastic for Scotland. Now, that's not our policy as a party. That's just my take on this. Okay. But I'm sure I'm not alone.
And very quickly, as a very avid cyclist who just went on a wonderful bike ride today, I would certainly support in whatever form I could to for example, make old railway paths right of way into cycling things. That would just be wonderful. So yeah.
Not far from where I live, like 10 minutes walk up the road, we've got the canal, Forth and Cliff Canal here, and beautiful cycle paths and walking and stuff. So we've got all of that opportunity. And in Scotland as well, our potential post-COVID for tourism is remarkable.
And making you know, a cyclotourist paradise. That would be wonderful. You get people from all over the world coming just because there's such beautiful scenery and yeah. Okay. All right. So what's it like to be a candidate?
Wow. It's interesting because I've supported candidates before, but we've had just in a party where you had an infrastructure and you had all volunteer at grassroots level, but you had a structure there.
Yes.
So to do that in a party where you are literally just up and running. So lots of the people who are here, I was talking to a couple of people today about it, who have experience of working at grassroots, primarily in SNP. So you've got a set of skills, but a much thinner infrastructure on the ground. So we're doing all sorts of things. I'm talking to you tonight. So
yeah, sure. And tell me more about that. It just, I mean, you got like 3 or 4 weeks, you know, or until the actual election. You know, you're not running on the constituent seats. You're just trying to get a certain portion of the list seats, which because of the way the system has been designed, gives you you know, even getting maybe half of the 2016 SNP. You know, seats could get all 32 of you in there, in theory,
Well, yeah, in
yeah,
theory.
in theory, yeah.
The De Hoyt system is Belgian. The guy was Belgian. And most countries in Europe use proportional representation. First past the post is rare.
Mm-hmm.
And not very fair, because the Tories are in Westminster with 42% vote. So, yeah. So we've got a mix in Scotland because, and it was the Unionists who put it in place so that they would design not to have any party would have a majority. But 2011, SNP managed it with one seat. But that was a mix of constituencies and list seats. So it's a kind of mix in Scotland. It's looking like SNP will get a lot of constituency seats that they're standing in. In the last election in 2016 that SNP stood in, and I kind of looked up the figures, they got almost 1 million list votes, but they got 4 list MSPs.
Yeah.
The Unionists got just over 1 million, but got 46 seats.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is Unionists. So what Alba, the strategy that Alex Salmon came up with, which I think is very good, is that if we are asking people to vote SNP on the constituency and Alba on the list. So I'm standing in the west of Scotland.
That if we use 2016 figures would only lead to a reduction of 4 SNP seats at the list seats, because they're not you're not even competing on the constituency seats.
Not at all, just the list.
Mm-hmm.
And
just to confirm that today's polls showing an SNP obtaining 1 seat from 35% of the regional vote. So for what that's worth.
So what we are targeting is Unionists. And if that almost million, 960,000 or something, list votes that SNP got last time and only got 4 seats, if Alba got those, we could end up with this super majority supporting independence in the Scottish Parliament. And there's your 2/3, that with Greens.
Okay.
So, and you're cutting down on the Unionists. So back to your point, there's another mechanism to say Scotland should be independent. People are voting for it. So, and I've heard the argument that SNP 1 and 2. However, I would also suggest that people have to think, if we want to get back into Europe, whatever that looks like, whether it's EFTA or the EU or whatever, they would never prescribe an individual party getting seats. It would be the Scottish people voting for it. And similarly, Westminster cannot argue against the majority of the Scottish population if they get a 2/3 majority of independent supporting MSPs in the Scottish Parliament. Argue they would try, but surely that collaborative working together would be a powerful voice, and we'd be looking at mechanisms to say you cannot deny democracy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Just makes sense.
Why do you, and among the, I won't name names, but among certain people, certain SNP politicians on Twitter who have a pretty overt hostility towards Alba for whatever reason. How do you see getting over that? I mean, given that Alex Salmon has been excluded from the 2 debates that have taken place, apparently they held a protest at STV headquarters, but getting wind of that a couple days before, they moved the venue of the debate to another place just so they wouldn't have to see people with Alba signs asking why Alex Salmon's not there. I mean, it's insane. I mean, I'm just at a loss for it. I sort of had this impression that, the SNP and other parties would be more supportive of, even to the point where in 2016 you had, what was his name? David Coburn so David Coburn could participate in the 2016 debates, but Alex Salmon can't in the 2021. I mean, why do you think that is? And I'm not speaking about the polls or how many SNP members are completely sympathetic and will vote Alba, but how do you kind of explain this at the upper echelons of the party, this absolute terror of Alex Salmond?
I don't know. I mean, again, personal opinion. I don't think it's a good idea to have a monopoly. And SNP effectively have, I mean, we can talk about the Greens who will say that they support independence, which they do, but it's not high up on their agenda. And I think it was 2019, I saw a clip recently that Patrick Harvey talked about, you know, having more independence supporting parties, and that would be a healthy, etc. I totally agree with that.
No.
So I'm not sure. I don't know whether it's a surprise reaction, because the party Alba is so new. It's as I say, it's 4 weeks old. So maybe it's that. Maybe it's a process that people hadn't anticipated. I don't know. I don't know why this extreme reaction. And it's not okay to treat people that badly on Twitter. You know, it's just not okay. So I think, you know, politics can be acrimonious. We've talked about issues that you'll have people on either sides, whether you're a unionist or whatever. But people need to behave respectfully. And I don't understand this reaction. I don't.
Okay. Another, question about infrastructure, about lifeline roads, which are crumbling to bits. I mean, I think, again, you know, you're early in your policy, but I can't imagine that improving the infrastructure would not be part of.
No. Yeah. But again, at the moment, we budget's obviously an issue. Whereas if we were independent, you can start setting your priorities. And in a country where we've got roads and we have to move things around in transport, I can't see it not being up there.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we're getting towards the end, but just sort of talk about what's the best case scenario, aside from, you know, Alba winning all 32 seats, but how do you, let's see, yeah, in terms of the campaign, with the remaining weeks, you know, I'll be interviewing Alba and other independents candidates every night that I can. And we want to, of course, as Independence Live, we welcome all parties. Of course, I need to give that caveat because sometimes Kevin is a little concerned about it. But given the you know, so Alex Salmond made his he had his international press conference today. Next Saturday he'll be holding a conference on that I, you know, could pretty well tell that he will be talking about a written constitution and getting into EFTA. I mean, he made it with his conference that he left no doubt that he, you know, he wants to get into EFTA quickly and then see later about the EU, because the EU will take time and acrimony no matter what, you know, no matter what the scenario. So assuming, and my view is that if these ideas can genuinely get out there and people can see, wow, he wants to get, you know, the Alba wants to get, you know, has a plan to get, you know, Scotland back in the single market quickly, which can be done. You know, again, I've talked to the EFTA guy and he said it can be done, but Scotland has to assert its sovereignty first. And I've had that reaction in my group that we talk every Saturday night. We, you know, some of my colleagues have talked to several different, you know, governments in, you know, Iceland or elsewhere, and they say, look, we're delighted to recognize you as an independent state, but it's you've got to do it. We can't do it for you, you know, and that's been the prevailing attitude among the ones that I've. So, how would you see ideally the next, you know, few weeks going to where these messages can get out and then we can get beyond the, you know, the fog of the, you know, the certain members of, you know, you know, I'll leave it at that, but that we can get beyond the exclusion that Alba has had from the debate thus far. And yeah.
I think you have to play the hand you're dealt. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair. And your point about David Coburn's well made, I think. But I think we have to look at mechanisms of getting messages out. I think it's important for me and the partner me, but the party, to get our messages out to voters at every opportunity.
Okay, and how do you plan to do that on a broad scale, given the time especially given the time constraints? I mean,
it's quite a different election for everyone, given COVID.
Of course.
So we will be we're doing a lot of, interestingly, and this has come from left field, a lot of the bloggers, the independence bloggers, are supporting Alba, which is quite unusual. They tend to be often ignored and sometimes pilloried, but they get to a lot of people, and a lot of grassroots people, and that's the voters. Alex Salmond's press conference today, there'll be more media. We'll be doing as much as we can using social media and interacting with people, but we are restricted. We can't knock doors and talk to people, which is very typical. So we have a plan. We will continue with the media strategy, which will primarily be Alex Salmond getting the messages out. We will be using a lot of social media and a lot of the independence media. But there was 200 different media turned up there today. Sadly, neither the BBC Scotland or STV turned up.
It's absolutely,
that doesn't make sense.
Absolutely bewildering. Absolutely.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Okay. A couple others. Does Delia believe that the majority of independent supporters don't actually understand the difference a supermajority of 86 pro-independent supporting SMPs would make? Do you think there's a lack of comprehension about that, or how do you see it?
Actually, what I'm finding when I'm talking to people, and even just folks that call you or ask questions, and just now when you're a candidate, is people don't really understand the system, the voting system. So we need to push that out a lot. There's been some really good short clips of videos and things on social media recently, and people are starting to realise that they've actually got two votes to use
that are not contradictory, that are not in opposition
one
to each other.
Doesn't cancel the other out.
Right, exactly.
One doesn't cancel the other out. So you've got a purple voting paper for your constituency, and you've got a kind of buff coloured one for the list. And that's how you can maximise. If you want independence, you get informed as to what is going to work. So if you do both votes SNP, that million votes that got 4 seats the last time, that's not going to get you there. Think a wee bit laterally, and we need to let people know that they've got 2 opportunities to make this work, and they don't cancel one another out.
Okay. And a final question before I let you say anything you want to add. Any idea on the time frame for independence? My own view is I don't know if there's going to be this actual moment in time when independence is achieved. It's the way that Alex Salmond is talking about it. He's going to go through a lot of different strategies to try to achieve it. Maybe this works, maybe that doesn't. But I can see he's got a very tactical point of view. But how do you see it? I mean, ideally, it would be great if Scotland were back in EFTA, independent in EFTA by July, which is in theory possible. But how do you see
that?
It?
Sounds soon to me.
Okay, probably.
I'd love it, but it sounds soon. No, I think we have to talk about it immediately after the election. So strategize, how can we do this and do it quickly?
Yeah.
How can we make it work? I'm disappointed when I hear it might be sometime during the period of the next Parliament. That's 5 years. And you need to start talking about it, I would argue, day one, to make it happen as quickly as possible. At this juncture, I don't know what that time frame would be, but I don't think it should be 5 years.
Agreed. Okay. Anything else you'd like to say? Plug your campaign.
Absolutely. Well, I said it. I'm an Alba candidate in the west of Scotland, and we have 32 candidates across the whole of Scotland. We're asking people to vote SNP on their purple voting paper for the constituency and on their buff coloured paper for Alba to maximise the independence MSPs in the Scottish Parliament to give us our best opportunity independence to start that conversation as quickly as possible after the 6th of May.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure having you this evening, and I look forward to you coming back whenever you want.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the invitation.
Okay.
Take care. Bye.